Namaskar and welcome to episode number 14 of Pustakalya Wala podcast. And we are at the end of this paper that we have been reading for a week now, almost a week. The last characteristic that we are going to study is psychedelics and the experience of unity, time, space, and self. This section and the conclusion section is the one we are going to cover today. This paper is almost done. This paper is actually completely done now, and we are going to start something else tomorrow. So be ready for experience of unity in time, space, and self. Okay. Time is the first thing. Time, people say things like, I experienced past, present, and future as a oneness. Things like, I experienced a touch of eternity. These perceptions, these feelings, these emotions that people get on psychedelics that are reported later on kind of suggests that yes, there is some dissolution of time, temporal boundaries. Just first person reports. So what do we, this is just a small paragraph on time. Time is just a little bit of data. The interesting part comes in self and space, and today's disagreement between me and this paper has increased from yesterday's disagreement because of some things that this paper has written that I kind of disagree with because of my own experiences and experiences of people who have been meditating for quite a long time, although I'm not, but I've had some experiences on meditation retreats and stuff. So let's go on, let's go forward. Self and space. So this paper says that there is this experience of unity, this ego dissolution that is really common in such kind of experiences, when people think that the boundary between the self and the surrounding get blurred. People say things like, the boundaries between myself and my surroundings seem to blur. The experience of unity and ego dissolution, it seemed to me that my environment and I were one. So these are all subjective measures of self-perception, but they haven't done objective measures yet. But this is all from the ASC questionnaire that we had discussed a few days ago. This questionnaire by Dietrich, this German guy. So this is another, all the rest of the statements, like, it seemed as though I did not have a body anymore, and I had a feeling of being outside my body. So this is all fine and dandy and perfectly okay. The general boundaries are dissolved. The people realize that people see that the world is, the boundaries that are present in the world are actually a part of the mind, because first of all they get this weird, vivid experience of synesthesia. There's a lot of, synesthesia, right? Synesthesia is a mixing of modalities. You can when you see a number, you feel a color. A noise changes the shape of things, and all those different ways in which different modalities in the mind can intermix and affect each other. modalities being just the different senses, different perceptions. So, and there is another experiment of Kanissa figures. These figures that you might have seen where three part circles are taken, their parts are taken out in such a way that it makes an illusion of a triangle where there is no triangle. Like there is no triangular line, but you perceive a triangle because of the shape of the cuts in those three circles that are lying. Their centers are lying at the vertices of the triangles, right? So those kind of experiences are reduced. There is psilocybin was also found to impair amodal completion, a process that is important for identifying the boundaries of objects and segmenting scenes within the visual environment. So since it's a way, in a way, it looks like this you kind of see things where you kind of perceive an illusion less in some way. There is less of an illusion effect in your mind. Now, let's go on and I'll explain why I said that and it'll explain itself. So this is what this is what the paper says. Whether these alterations in the experience of unity involve improvement or impairments in conscious processing partially turns on contested issues concerning the nature of reality. Consider, for example, the question of how the phenomenon of ego dissolution should be understood. Okay, so this is where they are trying to understand what ego dissolution might be. Those who ascribe to a no-self view of ultimate reality might argue that the experience of ego dissolution isn't an illusory experience, but instead involves a new and improved insight into reality. This is what I think. However, even if the self is ultimately a fiction, a well-functioning organism must be able to distinguish changes in its environment that are due to its own activity from the changes that are due to the activity of other agents. Thus, it seems likely that a blurring of the boundaries between future and past or oneself and the others will compromise cognitive and behavioral functions. This is where I don't agree with them. Because, first of all, I felt in the second characteristic yesterday that we were discussing, the last episode, they made some conclusions on the cognitive effects, which I semi-agreed with, but I thought they're jumping the gun a little bit. They are taking some liberties with the data because who can they really say it for surety that cognitive behaviors are impaired? I mean, they are not normal. They are not normally. The measures that you're measuring, the things that you're measuring in a normal state are impaired, but maybe there is some part of cognition that you are not even measuring here, which is improved. And I can kind of make up some things which are not, like, you can say that the mind is so occupied in the new perception that cognitive behaviors are impaired just by dint of not having the attention span because of all the new data. But let's not go on to that. The one I read today, the thing I read today, I'm sure it's more wrong. This conclusion is more wrong than yesterday's conclusion. They're saying things, they are really jumping the gun here. Why? Nobody said that when the ego is dissolved, they cannot differentiate between what they did and what the other agents did. This this dissolution of self is an experience that meditators have and can have. It's especially Dzogchen meditation um, practitioners. They can have it on command, and that's their meditation practice. In fact, they look at the self and they see that it's made up of. It's like the Kaniska figure. When you look at it closely, you realize it's just made of three semi circles. There is no triangle. The triangle is only implied, and when as you look closely, the illusion drops, and you see it for what it is. Right. This is the same with. This is all Sam Harris's words. Actually, this is the same with the self. When you can look at it closely, it dissolves into different modalities. You are just feeling the face, the sensations of the face. You have thoughts which feel like it's you are thinking them. There is a thinker of the thoughts, and this perception of you being sitting behind your eyes, all those things come into surface, and you realize all of them are just making this self. When you're not looking, when you're not paying attention, they feel like a self, but when you're paying attention, they don't. The thing that dissolves when you pay attention to it is the definition of an illusion, right? An illusion dissolves when you look at it. Some illusions do. Some are so deep that you cannot break them without having other measures. But nobody said those people who are on those states, who are on those psychedelic states, sorry, or those meditative states, not psychedelics. I'm not talking about psychedelics here, just the meditative state. Those people who are on those states where they feel like the self is dissolved, they can still differentiate between voluntary actions and involuntary actions. Even though both of these actions might feel like they are not coming from a doer in the mind, there is no center to all the experience. They can still. This is where it's hard to put it in words, but it's nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying that it. I didn't understand whether I moved it or the universe moved it or someone else moved it. Maybe on really strong dose of psychedelics that would also happen because the mind is in such a state. But those two are different things. You can still differentiate between voluntary and involuntary action. You can still differentiate between your thoughts and someone else's thoughts, because you don't have access to someone else's thoughts, right? This the So this is why I feel there's nothing wrong with being wrong. There is nothing. It's not a harmful thing to be wrong. This is how science is done, I would assume. But I would just say this betrays a lack of experience in those states by these people, because they are jumping to these conclusions which are completely unfounded. The it's kind of like a blind and the elephant kind of thing, where you are only focused on one thing. It's like this is a very interesting example. It's like people saying the meditation reduces stress, right? People use things like, oh, is there evidence that meditation reduces stress? And Sam Harris and Stephen Fry had this podcast where they discussed, and Sam Harris came up with this point, which was really fascinating. He said, should people be saying that learning how to read reduces stress? Maybe it may even increase stress, but do we then say that, oh, it's not reducing stress, so it's not important to you? The point is that the fact that you are meditating and you are able to meditate and remove this illusion of the self and really become free in the moment, that state is so much more profound and so life changing and life altering, that saying that, oh, does it reduce stress, it's it's a question that is it's kind of like saying, does learning how to read reduce stress? It does in a way, because, and this is, I think this is what's happening here. The impact of psychedelics, it's not like the impact of a priming, let's say, just a tiny effect, imperceptible effect by the person who's going through that effect, but a big effect for someone who's studying it, right? And who can get something out of it. This is a life altering event. This is something that people talk about and think about and look back to for years, right? And it has already shown to reduce alcoholism and PTSD symptoms and depressive symptoms. So there is a certain effect and a change and a mixing happening. And what we are doing here, what this paper is doing here, is trying to apply the same scaffolding of psychological research in the new in this new field. I would say a little prematurely, because this is a valid question. What they are saying is really valid in some way. When you first look at it, it's really valid. Of course, if you cannot understand between the difference between yourself and the other person in front of you, can you really function properly in society? But that question is answered by long-term meditators quite clearly. You don't have to feel like a self to behave, to function properly. In fact, you can function even more properly. You can be even more present and be available and be more functioning and be a better person to you and the other people around you, if you are not focused on yourself, and if you can see that yourself is an illusion from moment to moment. And this is where I don't agree with this conclusion, although I agree with the rest of this paper. They say clearly that yes, the it's important to say that levels of consciousness is completely should be thrown away, because it's multi-dimensional. States of consciousness are multi-dimensional. It's not like one is always better than the other, right? So that's a valid, and I agree with that conclusion, that it shouldn't be considered a higher state of consciousness or a lower state of consciousness. It should be considered a different state of consciousness, an altered state of consciousness. And that's all I agree with here. I learned quite a lot of things. There are other tests and stuff like that, so it's an important paper to read for me especially. But I just have a feeling I might be wrong here, but these people who are writing the paper might not have had the experience themselves. And you might say, yes, a scientist only studies the phenomenon from a third person perspective, but isn't your own conscious state a part of the data, right? Isn't that part of what should inform your view on this? Your own mind? Isn't your own mind a valid place for experimentation of understanding? And shouldn't it be considered? I've really gone quite a long time today, but I had to make this point, and there are still some things to say, but I'll stop here. And I think we should move on to other papers which are more basic for us. Like let's get away from psychedelic state for now, The next paper should be something else, something about perception, maybe some Anil Seth's paper or something like that. I'll check that. Thanks for listening. This has been a great experience till now. 14th number episode, and we have finished our first paper, and I'm really happy and excited for the future. I hope at least someone gets something out of it, and see you tomorrow.